How's it going, guys? It's Paul Myers, owner and lead therapist of Intentional Counseling. We're a group practice in Frisco, Texas. We specialize in mental health. I'm going to cover some anxiety treatments today because anxiety, I find, is one of the number one mental health disorders out there. Anxiety and depression, very, very common. So I'm going to cover some natural reactions that people have when they're fearful or anxious that I find are kind of a knee-jerk response, and then I'll cover some clinical treatments as well that will help with anxiety and treat it. So over here, we've got, on the left side, I've got the natural reactions. So what I find when people have fears, worries, insecurities, anxieties, they tend to resort to these things. It's almost instinctive. It's just a natural response to those anxiety that you have here. So we've got number one, which is avoidance. So I would say avoidance is actually number one way people try to cope with anxiety. So for example, if I'm afraid of plane flights and I were to avoid that, I would basically just never get on a plane. I would intentionally not fly, I would drive or just not travel. And what happens with that is avoidance temporarily reduces that fear because you aren't having to deal with the thing you're afraid of. But then what happens is I don't have any actual tangible evidence to challenge my fear. So really all I have to go off of is my fear and what I tell myself at that point. And so if 10 years go by of me avoiding plane flights, I have now 10 years of telling myself how dangerous plane flights really are, and no actual tangible evidence of flying to discredit those fears. So I'm actually going to have more anxiety than I started with over time. Okay? So avoidance actually makes anxiety worse, but it's so natural to avoid. Another example, like if I have social anxiety, I'm just going to avoid talking to people, or avoid going out, or avoid leaving the house, or avoid dating. And what happens is I increase my fear of talking to people because I don't actually get any practice doing it. So and you can see how anxiety is a very challenging disorder to try to treat because avoidance is so natural, but it makes it worse. So the natural reactions actually feed it. Okay? So the opposite of avoidance would be desensitization. So one of the clinical treatments of anxiety is called systematic desensitization. This means you have gradual exposure in incremental amounts to the very thing you're afraid of over time. And what happens is, you kind of track out how much exposure you can handle in small doses. So for example, the plane flight thing, I use that example. Let's say I'm just going to start by thinking about flying. Okay, and I'll think about flying for a while. It'll give me some anxiety, and I'll kind of work through some of that. And I'll do that for a while, and then we'll up the ante. And now I'm looking at pictures of planes, and I'm doing that for a while. And then we'll up the ante, and now I'll watch a video of a plane. And then we'll up the ante and do that for a while. We get comfortable with that. And then eventually I'm at the airport and I'm watching planes in real life take off all the way to the point where we're flying, okay? And we work our way into challenging your fears directly, but you have to do it gradually over time. That's desensitization. The more you expose yourself to the thing you're afraid of, you actually gain resilience to deal with it, and you overcome your fears. It's just very hard to do, obviously, right? So it's also possible to do without help, but you can challenge your fears and overcome them in that way. It's just hard. So definitely common but difficult. So that covers avoidance coping is very natural. There are many ways to avoid. You could use substances or drugs. You could pour into an addiction. You could just watch movies. You could work 100 hours a week. You could isolate and withdraw. There are many ways to avoid. And so that's just something to be aware of. If you have anxiety, try not to give in to your natural tendency to want to avoid. Okay? So then number two, second most common thing is control. So control is technically an illusion. You don't actually have it, but we try to feel like we do. And so the more we control, we feel like we're in control, our anxiety goes down temporarily. There are many ways to control, but we could try to control our environment, or control other people, or control the outcomes. Sometimes people get angry in an effort to control, which is, they're not really angry people, they're just anxious. And the anger is kind of a coping skill to control the situation when they're anxious. But control is an illusion, we don't really have it. The only thing you can really control is you, and I would even argue that ultimately God is in control, not us. And so control is not something that I find very healthy or realistic or attainable. And so the more we scrape for it, we do a lot of damage, and it brings a lot of consequences, even though it temporarily reduces that anxiety just in the moment, okay? So the counter to control is going to be cognitive skills. So there's like a healthy sense of acceptance we all have to have as people, where I don't have control and I'm going to let go of this, and that's okay. And I can be comfortable, I don't need the control. I can be okay with accepting things as they are and letting go of control, and trusting God to be in control, or just relinquishing that responsibility. So that's a cognitive skill, that's a mind game. Really have to practice those. It's very hard to develop cognitive skills on your own. You can, but I would highly recommend you go to counseling to do that, because a professional who's not emotionally invested in your situation, it's so much easier for them to be able to kind of spoon feed you healthy thought processes that you're going to need, versus for you to just magically whisk away your fears and come up with a different thought process is very unnatural, okay? So cognitive skills is the ability to control your own way of thinking, and that is a skill, that's not natural. So, but the more you develop that, you'll find that a control is this unhealthy thought process, false expectation that you really can let go of, which is very, very positive. And then you can control your thoughts to be more positive, which I find very helpful and clinically proven to treat anxiety. Okay, so number 3 is trusting your fears. I see so many people, they're anxious, they're fearful, they're worried, and they really, truly believe that their fears are accurate, that their fears are the reality. And so not to minimize or downplay that, those fears are very real to them. And their fears are real, but what they're thinking and their thought process or their narrative is actually not accurate. It's not in touch with reality, it's not realistic, it's not really true. They're just fears. So for example, I see a spouse who's just so fearful that their spouse is going to have an affair on them, and they're really convinced that affair is happening, when there really isn't one, and there's no desire for that, or there's no indication of that whatsoever. It's just a fear that they have. But they really believe that their fears are true, that they really buy into the narrative of their fear. And I would say that's actually a natural reaction, because fear is supposed to be a positive thing. And it's actually supposed to keep you safe. If there's a grizzly bear coming after me, that's a healthy fear, because it can really be dangerous. And my fear is saying, hey, you need safety. That's a healthy fear. So we tend to trust our fears because they try to protect us. The problem is, when you have anxiety, that's when you're fearful of things that aren't actually dangerous. You're just convinced that they're dangerous, and you've talked yourself into believing that they're dangerous when they're not. And so that's more of an irrational fear, but that's what anxiety is irrational fears. So very common, so don't beat yourself up if you have it. The fears are very potent, anxiety is very paralyzing. But there's a sense of trusting your fear as an ally to protect you, which actually backfires on you. The more you trust your fear, it actually betrays you. It makes it worse. So one of the anxiety treatments is challenging your fear and seeing your fear as the enemy and the problem, rather than the ally that protects you, which is unnatural, right? So mindfulness, there's a lot that goes into this, but mindfulness is more of like meditation, relaxation, deep breathing, awareness, staying present, controlling your mindset. And we're able to separate our emotions from our thoughts, and from our thoughts from facts. So facts, thoughts, and emotions, they're all separate things. Sometimes they're all doing their own thing and they're not really related at all. But we have a very hard time differentiating between those. When we're so fearful, we really just believe our fear as truth. And so we tell ourselves that our fear determines not only the emotion, but it determines the thoughts and it determines the facts. When really emotion has its own manual and it doesn't care about facts or reality at all. So mindfulness helps you challenge your fears rather than trust your fears, and clinically proven treatment for anxiety as well. So, okay. Do note, this is just an overview. This is not necessarily applicable in every single type of anxiety, because there are many types of anxiety. There's acute stress, there's PTSD, there's OCD, there's generalized anxiety, there's specific phobias. There are many types of anxiety. So this isn't exactly always applicable in all of those, but as a general sense of treating anxiety, these are great principles and great mindset to have when it comes to challenging your fears and overcoming your fears, okay? If you have any questions, comments, definitely please leave them below. And please subscribe, that helps us grow so we can help more people. The more people we help, the better. We'd love to help you. If you have not done therapy, go to intentional-counseling.com and we can set you up with a counselor, either myself or one of our other therapists at our practice. All right, guys, we appreciate you. Take care.